The wind that morning was not loud. It whispered like it knew what was going to happen, and did not want to get in the way. They took her up the tall hill, very quietly. There were 5 men, with rough hands, and their coat collars pulled up high. They walked through snow that came up to their knees. Their boots sank with every step. The youngest man kept looking back. His face was tight, like he felt a little bit guilty. The oldest man never looked down at her, not even once. They moved steadily, like when someone has already made up their mind and won't change it. The girl was almost still a child. She was 18, with pretty reddish-brown hair hidden. It was under a rough sack tied over her head. Her hands were tied in front with string. Her wrists were red and sore from a fight she had earlier. Her blue and white dress was torn at the shoulder. There were bruises on her cheek. A cut above her eye where the sheriff's ring hit her bone. But it wasn't the blood that made your heart hurt. It was how quiet she was. She didn't scream anymore. That part of her was silent now. Sheriff Luther Kane rode behind the group. His horse's reins were loose across his lap. His horse breathed out misty air into the cold. Kane's face was hard to read under his hat. The gray hairs in his beard were covered with snow. He hadn't spoken since the sun came up. Not since he told a room full of helpers and whispering townspeople that the girl had shamed him and that no law would keep safe what the law had already said was bad. Her name was Clara Rose McKinley. She was the daughter of a carpenter. She was known before for her kindness, for her singing voice when she hung clothes behind the church, for the pies she baked, for old ladies who couldn't get out of bed. That was before the sheriff became interested. Before he said he wanted to marry her. She had told him no, gently at first, then strongly, and finally, in front of everyone, when he tried to put his hand on her waist at the town dance. The sound of the slap echoed loudly, maybe even louder than her scream that morning when the sack was pulled over her head. The path became narrow near the top. A hawk flew overhead. Its cry was sharp and lonely. The snow had become like a soft powder, the kind that settles like ash. When they reached the edge, the cliff opened up in front of them, like a white cut in the world. Far below, rocks stuck out through the snow like broken teeth. There was no wind here, only quiet, like the land was holding its breath. The men did not look at her when they stopped. The youngest wiggled his feet nervously. One fixed his gloves. One mumbled a prayer. No one called her name. No one untied the sack. Sheriff Kane got off his horse. He walked forward slowly, his boots crunching. He didn't touch her. He only leaned close and whispered something that made the youngest man jump a little. Then he stood up straight, stepped back, and nodded. And that was it. They pushed her. Not hard, just enough. As if she were a bag of trash to be thrown away. Not a living thing with breath still in her chest. She stumbled, arms out, the sack moving as the world fell below her. And then she was gone. The quiet after was worse than a scream. Worse than gunshots. It was the kind of quiet you remember for many years. The men did not stay long. They turned back toward town without talking. Kane rode in front this time, but Clara didn't die. The fall was steep, but not clean. There were twisted branches, half buried in snow. One of them caught her dress, ripping it but making her fall slower. Her body hit the rocks below. Her ribs were bruised, her leg twisted, but the snow held her gently in its cold arms. It wasn't kindness. It was an accident. But sometimes, an accident is all that good luck needs to come into the world. She lay there as the light faded. The sack still covered her face. Her breath came in short, quick gasps. Each one was a cloud. She couldn't move her leg. She couldn't. Single quotes scream. The pain in her ribs made breathing feel like she was drowning. But she was alive. That feeling beat stronger than the pain. Far above, the town's big fire began to smoke. The day had ended. They would go back to their homes, eat soup, put children to bed. The sheriff would clean his badge. A boy named Eli, who had been sent into the woods to gather small sticks for fire, saw something below the cliff as he looked for pine cones. He saw the red in the snow first. Then the movement. A twitch like a bird with a broken wing. His mouth opened wide. He dropped his basket and ran. As night came, the cold became deeper. Clara drifted in and out of being awake, each time wondering if she had gone under for good. Her fingers were becoming numb. Her thoughts became slow and blurry. But even in that haze, one feeling stayed strong. Shame. Not for what she had done. She had done nothing. But for the way they had looked at her, like she was nothing. Like she belonged to someone, and now she was ruined. Snow began to fall again, gentle like forgiveness. A person moved on the high ridge. Not one of the men from earlier. Not anyone from town. Rider. Tall. Still. Dark against the snow. He got off his horse slowly, tying his horse to a dead tree. His face was rough from the weather. His eyes were deep and quiet. He knelt beside her. He lifted the edge of the sack carefully, like he was looking back in time. Her eyes fluttered, open. Their eyes met for a quick moment. Then the world tilted again, and she knew nothing more. Somewhere, someone lifted her. She felt warmth and fur and the smell of cedar wood. A voice, not in English, whispered something low. She wanted to ask who he was, but her throat would not let her. The rider placed her across his horse's saddle, held like a child, and covered her with a blanket. Snow fell around them. Not harsh, not mean, just falling. He led the horse forward, through the white quiet, not toward town, but away from it, into the trees. Behind them, the cliff remained quiet, still, like it had never seen anything. But the snow there would never quite look the same again. And the wind, when it passed through that place, sometimes carried the sound of a girl's breath, rising, strong, and alive. She was not supposed to live, but she did. The snowfall became thicker. By morning, it was like a silent attack on the world. Trees bent with its weight. Their branches stretched toward the ground like tired old people. The stream near the old Native American path had frozen completely still, and not a single bird dared break the quiet. Only horse prints whispered across the land. Deep, steady, not hurried. Ronan Ghost Hawk rode through the snow without speaking to his horse. He didn't need to. The horse followed the path as if pulled by a memory, not by muscles. The animal was skinny, black like burnt wood, and showed signs of long journeys. Ronan wore a coat made from buffalo hide, sewn by his dead wife's hands. Now, it was old and worn from many years. Around his neck, a leather string held an iron ring. It was too small for his finger, too important to bury. He had not meant to come back this way. The small house he rode toward had been closed up for 3 winters now, left behind when sadness made even a home feel unbearable. But something in the wind had turned his head. Something beyond what he could see or understand. He trusted such feelings. They had kept him alive longer than bullets ever could. It was the red that caught his eye. Not bright. Just a faint smudge in the untouched snow, like rust bleeding through white cloth. He slowed the horse. Got off. Squatted low beside the mark. A torn piece of blue cloth clung to a broken branch. The snow here had been messed up. Strange. Too far from any path. The cliff above stood silent, pretending to be innocent. And then he saw her, half buried under frost and bone-colored snowdrifts. Her body lay crooked. One leg twisted under her. One hand digging into the snow, as if she tried, even at the end, to get up. The sack still covered her face. Her chest barely moved. Ronan's breath came out in one cloudy sigh. He moved like a man touching sacred ground. First, he removed the sack. Her face was bruised. Her eyelashes had ice on them. Blood at her temple had frozen in two. Her hair. She was young. Younger than his wife had been when she died. There was a line around her neck, where the sack string had rubbed her. Raw. He touched her cheek. It was barely warm. Ronan did not ask, what happened. He had seen too much to need the full story. The marks were clear. The sheriff's rope. The townspeople's silence. The kind of meanness that wore the law like a mask. He picked her up gently. One arm under her shoulders. The other under her knees. She groaned a soft animal sound, but did not wake. Her weight. Was light. Not the kind of light that meant youth. The kind that meant hunger. Ronan laid her across the saddle, wrapped her in his coat, and got on behind her. The horse turned east without being told. The path narrowed. Pine trees closed in. Snow. Clung to Ronan's eyebrows and eyelashes, but his face did not change. He kept one hand at the girl's back, holding her steady as they rode. As evening came, they reached the cabin. It stood hidden among trees, like a secret kept too long. The door groaned when he pushed it open. Dust danced in the firelight from a single match. He laid her on a small bed by the fireplace, then lit the stove with shaky fingers. The cabin slowly breathed in warmth. He did not touch her again that night. Instead, he made a medicine from bitter roots and pine. He took off her boots, carefully noticing the cracked skin, the blackening toes. She'd almost lost her foot to the cold. He wrapped it in soft material, wrapped it in wool. When she stirred, she whimpered, but her eyes did not open. He sat beside the fire and watched her. For 2 days she slept, going between quietness and fever. Ronan fed her soup through a small carved spoon, whispered prayers in a language the town had long forgotten, and never once asked her name. When she finally opened her eyes, it was evening. The cabin glowed golden-orange with firelight. A pot of stew bubbled quietly. Ronan sat in the far corner, carving a piece of cedar wood. Clara's voice cracked when she tried to speak. Nothing came out. He looked up, set the carving aside, and came closer. She flinched. He stopped in the middle of his step, and lifted his hands. Not to give up, but to be still. He offered a cup of water. She didn't take it. Instead, her eyes looked around the room. The wooden beams, the window with curtains, a small collection of tools, a bow hanging over the door. Then she looked at him. He had dark hair. His face was shaped by wind and fire and time. Not young, but not old. His eyes were the color of earth, steady and hard to read. A scar curved down one cheek, disappearing into his collar. His face did not ask for trust, but offered it quietly, as if to say, you can leave it at the door if you want. No one will take it here. She reached for the water. When she drank, he nodded once and turned away. She watched him scoop stew into a bowl, leave it at the table, and go back to his corner. Not once did he ask where she'd come from. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was safe. By the 5th day, Clara could speak. She whispered her name one night as he was adding wood to the fire. He didn't answer, just added a log, waited, then said, "You'll walk again." It was the first time he'd spoken since bringing her there. She blinked quickly, tears pricking her eyes. "Why did you help me?" He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally did, he spoke. Without looking at her, because someone didn't. The pain in her chest grew again, from the fall, but from memory. Her voice failed her, so she nodded. He saw it and nodded back. The days grew into a normal routine. Clara learned to move with the crutch he carved for her. She helped peel potatoes, fix the curtains, sweep snow off the porch. He hunted chopped wood, brought back plants wrapped in cloth. They never spoke much, but they didn't need to. The quiet became softer. Once she asked, "What's your name?" He stirred the stew without looking up. Ronan. It fit him. A name you couldn't bend, couldn't ruin. Clara woke one morning to find a new pair of boots by her bed, lined with fur. Too big, but warm. She cried quietly into her pillow. Not because of the gift, but because of how it was left. Without a show, without pride. She never said thank you. She didn't need to. That afternoon, she walked a few steps outside. The cold bit her lungs. But she stood there, letting the snow fall onto her face, watching the horizon where the cliff still sat in silence. She did ask Ronan to take her back to town. She didn't want to. He watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, a blanket around his shoulders. For a moment, she felt seen in a way that didn't take anything from her, as if she were not broken, not shamed, not owed, just alive. She looked back toward him, toward the warmth behind the door. She stepped forward, he stepped aside. And that was how she came to stay. Not because she was forced to, but because she chose to remain in that cabin, among snow and stones and silence. Clara Rose McKinley began to become someone new. Smoke from the fireplace curled gently upward, making the ceiling beams blurry with the smell of pine and ash. Outside, snow hit against the cabin walls. Inside, the quiet had changed. No longer a wall between strangers, but a warm blanket stretched across two souls, learning how to breathe. Again, Clara sat near the fire, stirring a pot of rabbit stew. One hand wrapped in cloth from slicing herbs too clumsily the day before. Her crutch leaned against the table leg, though her ankles still swelled at sunset. She had begun moving through the cabin without needing Ronan's arm. He watched her from the doorway, arms folded, his face hard to read, yet softer than when she'd first seen him through swollen eyes. In those quiet days, she learned more about him by his absence than his presence. He spoke rarely, but his silences had meaning. Some meant he was thinking, others meant he was listening. His movements were exact, his tools always placed where they belonged. He fixed a broken door hinge without being asked, chopped out firewood with a rhythm that matched his breathing. When he passed her a blanket or spooned soup into her bowl, he never looked directly at her. but she felt the care woven into every movement. She'd come to know his name, Ronan Ghost Hawk, by hearing it whispered once when he traded animal skins for salt in town. The woman behind the counter had looked him over, with a mix of respect and fear, whispering the name under her breath as if it might burn her tongue. Clara hadn't asked about it. He hadn't offered. In return, he never asked for the full story of her fall. He never repeated the questions she heard in her own head each night. He simply gave her space and time, and in doing so, offered something no one else had, respect that did not demand. Still, words eventually found their way in. Over shared stew, over the sound of a lone wild dog howling in the dark, over the noise of snow sliding off the roof. "I used to sing," she said one night, her voice small, mostly in the mornings before things changed. Ronan had looked up from where he carved a thin wooden bird, with a curved beak. "What changed?" She hesitated. "Everything." He nodded once, and that was the end of the question. She began singing again 2 days later, not for him, and not loudly, just to the pot as she stirred. A hum at first, then the faint shape of a church song her mother used to hum over rising bread. Her voice cracked at the high notes. She didn't stop. At night, she'd lie on the cot and watch shadows from the fire flicker across the log walls. Sometimes Ronan sat by the fire past midnight, taking care of something he wouldn't name. Once she saw him hold a necklace, worn leather with a small piece of blue-green stone. He stared at it alone for a while before putting it back into a small bag near his heart. On the 8th night, she asked, "Was it your wife's?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes." Clara said nothing, but her fingers pressed against her chest where her own memory hurt. The town didn't stay quiet long. Mrs. Beatrice Elwood, a widow and a woman who sewed clothes, had a tongue sharp enough to make paint peel off. She'd seen Ronan stop by the general store for flour and a way to make fire, and noticed the second pair of boots tied to his horse's saddle. That was all she needed. By morning, she told half the town. The Cliff Girl's alive, and he's got her hidden in that ghost cabin past the ridge. The whispers spread like snow, melting in spring. It's soft, unavoidable, and cold under the surface. Why'd he keep her? Maybe she's carrying his mixed-race child already, or maybe she tricked him. Some girls do. Even the church people spoke quietly and bitterly. No one mentioned Sheriff Kane, but his silence made the bad feelings worse. He'd been seen drinking more, slapping a bottle off the bar, and muttering about ungrateful children. No one asked what he meant. Inside the cabin, the air remained warm. The quiet was honest. Clara spent her morning sitting by the window watching crows fly in circles around the frozen trees. Her ankle healed slowly, her shame faster. One afternoon Ronan returned from hunting with a fresh rabbit. News they're watching the ridge. Clara's jaw tightened. "They think you kidnapped me. They think many things." She didn't ask what he planned to do. He didn't ask what she wanted. But that night, as they ate by firelight, she said something she'd never dared to say out loud. "I should have died on that cliff. That's what they wanted." His spoon paused halfway to his lips. "I didn't," she continued. "Because of snow. And you. But I'm not sure I was meant to come back." Ronan set the bowl down gently, his fingers steady. Then, after a long breath, he looked at her, not over her, not past her, directly. "They threw you away. That doesn't mean you're useless." Her throat tightened, not from the words, but from how clearly they were spoken. A quiet settled between them, again. But this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. Clara reached for her shawl and stood up, limping slightly, toward the door. Ronan rose to outside. The stars sparkled above like frost caught in black velvet. Snow reflected their light, making the porch glow. She stood there, staring out, toward the direction of town. Her voice came out quietly. "I can't go back to being who I was. And I don't want to be what they tried to make me." Behind her, she heard the soft sound of footsteps on wooden boards. Ronan stood beside her, arms folded against the cold. "Then don't." She looked up at him, unsure if he meant it so simply, but his eyes said he did. The next morning, she woke up early and cut her hair. Not because she was angry, not because of shame, but as a way of getting rid of something. She tied the long strands into a bundle and placed it in the fire. Ronan said nothing, only added another log. Later that day, she sewed a new edge on her dress, making it shorter, more useful. Then she walked outside with no coat, letting the cold bite her arms. She didn't flinch. In town, Mrs. Elwood swore she saw smoke rise from the ridge and said it looked like something had been set free into the sky, and Sheriff Kane began sharpening his knife. The sky wore its heaviest gray that morning. Low, dark, full of promises it intended to keep. Smoke curled from the chimney of the cabin in the woods, not with cheer, but necessity. The cold was no longer a visitor. It had unpacked its bags inside. Clara stirred a pot of beans slowly, her mind elsewhere. Her ankle no longer swelled like it had, and her hands no longer trembled when she braided her hair. She had begun speaking more and even laughing once, though it had surprised her as much as him. Still, some part of her stayed ready. Like she knew the quiet could not last. Ronan had felt it too. He said little, but he sharpened his knives longer each night, checked the door latch twice, and took to riding out farther when gathering wood, his eyes scanning the tree line instead of the path. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. It was late afternoon when the first boot prints were heard. Not one pair, but several, crunching hard in the snow. Ronan stood at the window, hand resting on the windowsill, jaw tight. "They're here," he said. Clara put down the ladle and wiped her hands on her skirt. She didn't ask who. She already knew. When the knock came, it wasn't a knock at all. It was a pounding, angry and demanding. Ronan didn't open the door. He stepped outside instead. There were 6 men, all on horses, all with weapons. In the middle of them was Sheriff Luther Kane, still wearing his badge, though everyone could see it no longer shined. His face was red from drink, his coat trimmed with fur, as if to remind others of who he thought he was. Well, Kane spoke slowly, getting off his horse with a grunt. "Look at you, living like a wild king." Ronan said nothing. He simply stood, arms at his sides, steady. Clara watched from behind the curtain, her breath caught when Kane's eyes drifted toward the door. "Now go talk," Kane continued, spitting the name like a sticker in his teeth. "I've come out of kindness. I could have sent the boys ahead. No talk. But I figured I'd ask. Nice first, that girl's mine. She's been taken." "You threw her," Ronan replied, his voice low. Kane's face twitched. One of his men shifted uncomfortably in the saddle. "She ran," Kane said louder, "and even if she hadn't, this ain't your fight. It's town business." Ronan stepped forward once. "She's not property. Double quotes. Kane smiled. Cold. "No, she's a mistake. One I intend to fix." Clara opened the door then, stepping out with no coat, no fear. Her face was pale from winter, but calm. The wind blew her hair back, and even from a distance, she looked taller than she had before. "You don't get to talk about me like I'm not here," she said. Kane's head turned sharp and quick. His eyes narrowed. "Girl," he muttered. "You're lucky I don't bring you back in chains." "You already did that once," she answered. "I still have the scars." There was a long silence. The kind that hangs between thunder and lightning. Ronan stepped between them. Not with meanness, but with purpose. Kane bristled. "You want blood?" Ronan asked. "You'll bleed first." Kane's men looked at one another. Some of them had wives. Some had daughters. And Clara, standing there proud and not broken, was no ghost. She was human, more alive than Kane's anger could hide. Still, Kane pulled out his gun. It happened fast. One of his men reached for his own gun. Ronan stepped forward, arm lifted to shield Clara. The shot rang out. Not from Kane, from Ronan's shoulder. Blood spread dark against the snow as the bullet tore through flesh. Clara cried out and reached for him, pulling him back, her fingers slipping on his coat. Kane raised his gun again, until he heard the sound behind him. Click, the clear sound of a deputy getting his rifle ready, pointed not at the cabin, but at Kane. It was the youngest of them, the same one who looked away on the cliff. "Enough," the boy said. Kane turned, eyes wide. "You turn in on me. I saw what you did," the boy said. "I helped. I'm not helping." Again, another deputy lowered his weapon. And then another. The quiet returned, but this time it belonged to Clara. She stepped forward past Ronan, her hand shaking, but her voice clear. "You don't get to finish what you started. Not today." Kane stared at her, and in that moment, the sheriff who'd ruled with threats and sneers looked suddenly small. His power didn't crack, it vanished. He put his gun away with shaking hands. Without a word, he got on his horse. The others followed. the youngest nodding once to Clara, before turning away. Only the snow remained, falling gently over blood, over footprints, over the smoke that curled once again from the chimney. Clara helped Ronan inside, tore strips of her apron to wrap his shoulder, her fingers moving with care and grace. He didn't cry out. He watched her, instead, as if seeing her become new. "You didn't have to step out," he whispered. "I did," she said, "so I could walk back in." Night fell slowly. Stars twinkled through the gray, and inside the cabin, firelight danced again. Clara sat by Ro's side as he slept, his breath shallow but strong. She didn't cry, not yet. She held his hand and watched the flames. Behind her, the world had changed. And somewhere in town, the sheriff's name was being spoken, not with fear, but with a question. And the girl they thought broken now stood in memory, like fire on snow. The snow did not melt that spring, not all of it. Under the trees near the ridge, the snowdrifts stayed, stubborn and quiet, holding perhaps the memory of blood and footfalls, the breath of a girl who had once been thrown, and the man who caught her without lifting a hand. Inside the cabin, light came through the curtains like soft gold. Ronan's wound had healed slowly, the scar a pale, half-moon shape under his collarbone. He moved with less ease now, but never once did he complain. Clara noticed he began writing. Small things in a notebook, short lines in a language he didn't understand. With careful brushstrokes, he didn't say what they meant. She didn't ask. What mattered was that he'd started keeping a record of the days. She had changed too. The shaky feeling in her voice had vanished. Her hair was shorter, her step lighter. She no longer asked permission to do things. Not because she'd grown defiant, but because she no longer believed she needed to say sorry for being alive. When she walked into town with Ronan for the first time, no one spoke. But they saw. Mrs. Beatrice Elwood dropped her spool of thread. Reverend Hart looked at the street. Lemps the butcher's wife nudged her son not to stare. Clara held her head high. They didn't go for supplies. They went for truth. Sheriff Kane had left town the week after the fight. No badge, no goodbye. Some said he headed west. Others said he drank himself into dust. Clara didn't care which was true. What mattered was that the fear he'd planted no longer grew. Still, even weeds leave seeds. At the town hall, Ronan stood quietly behind Clara while she stepped to the big book and signed her name. Under a new section, living beyond town's border, by her own choice. No permission, no property listed, just her name, Clara Rose McKinley. And beside it, without a big fuss, Ronan signed his. Not marriage, not ownership, just names together. When they left, a few townspeople watched from windows, their eyes flickering between shame and wonder. But no one stopped them. No one dared. Back at the cabin, Ronan replaced the broken door hinge with a shiny brass one Clara had chosen from the general store. She smiled as it clicked into place, a sound more lasting than promises. In the evenings, they planted root vegetables behind the cabin. Clara dug, while Ronan hoed, both moving slowly, steadily. Her laughter came easier now. His shoulders didn't get stiff when she touched his arm. He carved her a new crutch, smaller and lighter, though she needed it less each day. Once under a purple evening sky, she said, "You never asked me what I wanted." He looked at her and replied, "You didn't need to want, you needed to heal." She nodded. Then, "But now I do." He raised an eyebrow, silent. She pointed to the ridge in the distance. "I want to go back." So they went. It took most of a day to reach the top. Clara's limp slowed them, but she didn't give up. Ronan walked beside her, saying nothing as the wind grew stronger and the trees became fewer. The path curved just as it had that day, though now the snow was softer, cleaner. No blood marked it. No men waited. When they reached the cliff, she stood at its edge and looked down. The rocks below still crouched like teeth. The pine tree that caught her fall remained bent but not broken. For a long time, she said nothing, just breathed. Then she pulled from her bag a small bundle of cloth tied with string, her old hair. She laid it gently at the edge of the cliff, holding it down with a single stone. "I leave her here," she whispered. The girl who begged. The girl they tossed. The wind took the ends of her words and carried them away. Ronan stepped forward, offering her his hand. She didn't take it at first. She stood steady, facing the place that had nearly ended her. Then she turned, took his hand. and walked away without looking back. Later that night, they sat by the fire, a blanket around their shoulders. The cabin had become a home, not just shelter. It held the shape of their days, the rhythm of shared silences. He leaned in close. "You still sing in the mornings," she smiled. "You still pretend not to listen." Outside, snow began falling again. Not heavy, just enough to catch the moonlight. It dusted the porch, kissed the firewood, softened the scars in the trail. They did not speak of marriage. They did not speak of what the town thought or would think. Their love was not made of big promises or church bells. It lived in the way he refilled her tea before she asked, the way she laid her hand on his when bad dreams came in sleep. Months passed. Then came the spring thunder, short, warm, alive, with color. The garden they'd planted began to grow. Clara laughed when the carrots came up crooked. Ronan taught her to braid onions, to hang from the ceiling beams. Sometimes they walked the ridge again, not out of memory, but to measure how far they'd come. The town forgot her name, or rewrote it. Stories changed, twisted, grew kinder in the mouths of those who were scared. She left town by choice, they said. Married an Indian, I think. Lives out near the ridge. They never said the word throne, never said tried to kill. But the snow remembered. Every spring, just before the thaw, one spot near the cliff stayed white longer than the rest. Travelers said it looked like the shape of a woman's body, lying still. Others said they heard singing. Clara never corrected them. One evening, many years later, she sat by the fire with a child on her lap. Hers or not, it didn't matter. The child looked up and asked, "Did it really happen? Did they really throw you?" She smiled, not bitterly, not sadly, just softly, like someone who'd grown tall enough to see above the storm. "They thought they buried me," she said. "But I was a seed." Then she tucked the child into bed, kissed their forehead, and returned to the porch where Ronan waited. Older now, but still steady. And together they watched the snow fall one last time. Silent, soft, and holy. Like it remembered every step they had taken. Every step that had brought her back to herself.